Hello YouTube and welcome back to another video. This time I'm doing a video response to the 16-bit brothers. In their last video of Masturbators they asked, what is your favourite beat 'em up? Now of course I enjoyed their video. I loved a lot of their responses. You know, they all brought up some interesting choices, but one of them actually brought up my favourite game, which I will say at the end of this video. But before I get into that, I did want to sort of give you a brief rundown on why the 2D side-scrolling beat 'em up is my favourite genre. Which is why I had to do this video, because when the 16-bit brothers brought up this topic, you know, I immediately thought, yeah, I've got to jump on this. This is the 2D side-scrolling beat 'em up is probably the reason why I'm a hardcore gamer today. So what I'm going to do before I give my actual answer is sort of give you a very brief rundown on all the sort of my arcade experiences from back in the day, and why that particular genre is my favourite, really. We sort of have to go back to sort of like the very late 80s. I'm talking about maybe 89, 1990, and around that time I got to play the very first proper side-scrolling beat 'em up for me, which was the Turtles arcade game. Now, back in those days, the Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, as it was known here in the UK and in Europe, you know, it was massive back in the day. Where a lot of kids my age were fans of the Turtles. So when the game came out, you know, it was a phenomenon. It was a massive big deal. I knew a lot of people that were flocking to arcades to play that game, and I was certainly one of them. And it was a brilliant game. The 4-player cab was fantastic, and that was the game that sort of initially got me hooked in the genre. And as I sort of kept going into the arcade, I kept finding, you know, all these different 2D side-scrolling beat 'em ups. The next prominent one being Final Fight, which is a very well-known beat 'em up. You know, you can play it on various systems, and you can even play it on the PlayStation Network today. It's a game that has definitely stood the test of time. Strangely, most of my experiences with Final Fight have actually been in the arcades. And I also do have it for the PlayStation Network as well, which is fantastic. But a port I do have of it as well is on the Game Boy Advance. Final Fight 1 for the Game Boy Advance is definitely one of the best ports of Final Fight. So yeah, I really do love that port as well. So that's a very enjoyable one. Other games I sort of played around that time, the sort of games that I really liked, were Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, which was a licensed game by Capcom. Capcom and Konami were the two companies at that time that were responsible primarily for most of the side-scrolling beat 'em ups that came out around that time. And at that time, Capcom used a lot of licenses to create different beat 'em ups, and one of them being Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. Now, I'm not particularly familiar with the source material itself. I believe it's sort of based on a cartoon comic series, but I've not seen the cartoon, nor have I read the comic of Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. But that was definitely one that I played a lot as a kid. I know Sega also did a few beat 'em ups as well, and there's a few licensed ones. And I believe they made Spider-Man Arcade, which was definitely one of my favourites back then. You sort of got to choose, you could play as one of 4 characters, Spider-Man obviously being one of them. And it was a really great game. I remember spending a lot of time with my friend playing that one. So Spider-Man Arcade was definitely one that stood out for me. I also got to play the X-Men arcade game, which I think most of you probably know of, which was a 4-player arcade cabinet. It got a release on the PlayStation Network and Xbox Live not too long ago. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore, but you know, Konami sort of re-released it briefly. Other notable 2D side-scrolling beat 'em ups that I played at that time, well, on home consoles, you know, it had to be Streets of Rage and Streets of Rage 2. Both really great games, fantastic. Spent a lot of time playing those. But going back to the arcades, it was definitely Capcom for the most part did some of my favourite ones, and I mean, Capcom did Dungeons and Dragons, which was another notable one for me. And two of my favourites had to be The Punisher, as well as Aliens vs Predator. Capcom's game of Aliens vs Predator. And the reason I say it like that is because there's actually two side-scrolling beat 'em ups that use the Aliens vs Predator license. There is one on the Super Nintendo that was made by Activision. That game I have no interest in. It does not even reflect what the original one was. And Capcom made a brilliant arcade port of Aliens vs Predator. That's definitely one of my favourite games. Absolutely loved that game because I was very big into the Predator movies, and I love the look of the Predator. He's actually one of my favourite movie characters. So the prospect of being able to play as the Predator was just amazing. It was mind-blowing to me. Like, I absolutely loved it. I remember grinning like an idiot as I was playing the game. Just fantastic memories. Of course, other games I played Captain Commando was another one that I played a lot in the arcades as well. I actually have very fond memories of being in an arcade, playing that game again with a friend, and actually just pumping money into it until I completed it. One of the sort of greatest moments of my gaming life was completing that game in the arcade, and I absolutely loved it. But yeah, so it was just a genre that I just always went back to. I mean, primarily in the arcades. If I wasn't playing 2D side-scrolling beat 'em ups, I was playing 2D fighters. You know, a lot of it also had to do with the source material that it was based off. I mean, I was a big fan of Street Fighter 2, so that was a game I would go back to quite a lot. But when Capcom started releasing a lot of licensed games, Capcom at the time had acquired the Marvel license, and then they released X-Men Children of the Atom. And that time, I was a big fan of the X-Men cartoon show of the 90s, as well as the comics. I was very big into the X-Men sort of during the early to mid-90s. And when X-Men Children of the Atom was released, you know, it just blew my mind. It was just a fantastic game. So a lot of it had to do with sort of the licenses that was also involved, and that had a lot to do with why I was into such games. So that's why Spider-Man Arcade tends to stick out with me quite a lot, because it was a Spider-Man game. You got to play as all these other Marvel characters, and you got to fight all these Marvel villains. It was just amazing, you know, and they were just great fun to play. As to why the 2D side-scrolling beat 'em up sort of resonates with me so much, it's hard to say. I guess it's because of its simplicity. I mean, some people criticize 2D side-scrolling beat 'em ups for being kind of repetitive, and I definitely see where people are coming from. I definitely see what people are trying to say, but I don't know. There's just something about certain beat 'em ups that for me don't feel repetitive. Mainly because whether it's the level design is very interesting. The characters I play as is interesting. There's a good wealth of moves. I mean, there are a few side-scrolling beat 'em ups that I do find quite repetitive, mainly simply because the characters themselves don't have a lot of moves. So you get tired of just pressing punch as you go along, you know. But so for me, the ones that stood out are the ones that sort of did bring some sort of variety, or just felt great to play. So yeah, so moving on now. So going back to my favourite game, my favourite 2D side-scrolling beat 'em up. And honestly, this is actually very hard, because while I do have my favourite home console side-scrolling beat 'em up, to actually have to narrow it down across the board, including arcade games, it's very, very hard for me. But before I get into sort of my ultimate favourite, I will just sort of say that in terms of home consoles, my favourite has to be, let's pick this up now, Streets of Rage 2. So I'm definitely with Johnny on this. Absolutely love Streets of Rage 2, and it is a game that has remained a firm favourite to this day. And I'm not alone. Practically all my friends love this game. In fact, to this day, it's still a game that gets played, and with my friends in multiplayer. And I've got friends that don't care much for old games anymore, but this is definitely one that they don't dispute putting back on and having a quick blast as we drink a few beers or whatever. This is definitely the game they want to put on when they come round, or, you know, whether we play it on emulation or via the PlayStation 3 or on this. You know, it's the game we always come back to. And why it's my favourite on the console is, number one, it's got great levels. I think the game is suitably long. I think each level it's just got a really great pace to it. There's enough levels in the game to really sort of sink your teeth into. Each character has a great array of moves. And Sega definitely stepped up from the original Streets of Rage, because I do love the original Streets of Rage game, but this one was sort of rebuilt from the ground up, and they did a fantastic job with it. And I felt it just improved it to another level. I mean, of course, it's all debatable. I know there are people that do prefer the original Streets of Rage, but I honestly find it difficult to see how they could favour that one over this one, just simply because of the obvious improvements. One of the things that stood out to me about the second game was the bigger sprites. For whatever reason, I always prefer my side-scrolling beat-em-ups to have quite large sprites. I really didn't like the ones that had really tiny sprites. I guess that's why I never really got into such scrolling beat-em-ups like Double Dragon. Like, I never got into those ones because I just didn't like the fact that the sprites were quite small. It's weird. I guess it's sort of the aesthetic that sort of replicates the arcade, because a lot of the arcade beat-em-ups had large sprites. So I guess that's why I tend to prefer the ones with these larger sprites as opposed to the smaller ones that traditionally were on a lot of the home console ports, because they were inferior ports, so they had less detail to them. But yeah, so there's that, and of course, before I even go anywhere, I have to talk about the music of Streets of Rage 2. It's absolutely amazing. The soundtrack to Streets of Rage 2 is just so good. I mean, this is coming from someone that, to be perfectly honest, I don't give two shits about game soundtracks. I rarely do, honestly. I mean, there's only two franchises that I really, really, really love the music, to the point where I do listen to it, you know, when I'm not even playing games. I listen to it like it's proper music. And this is one of them. And, you know, it's fantastic. Like, I could name songs off this. I mean, it's just a really great reminder of that particular period in time. And it's a shame, because Streets of Rage 3 that followed this, while the game on a sort of gameplay level is a lot better, the music really let it down, and I felt that the game just wasn't as enjoyable because I just didn't really like the music as much, and I never realised how that alone would play such a big part into my overall enjoyment of the game. But yeah, so that's really why Streets of Rage 2 has remained my favourite game on the home console in terms of this particular genre. And you know, don't get me wrong, I mean, there are other games both on the Mega Drive and primarily on the Super Nintendo that come very close to this, you know, and I'm sure most of you can guess which ones they are. But for me, you know, this definitely stands head and shoulders above the rest. You know, it's just, to me, it's gaming perfection, and by that I mean it's just a game that I can put on at any time. I never get bored of it. It's quick, pick up and play. It gives me enough of a challenge. It's something that my friends can play, and I just enjoy the overall vibe of the game. So that's it. That is my favourite game on the home consoles. So I do agree with you, Johnny. Johnny, you definitely had the best choice. So props to you for bringing up Streets of Rage 2, because that is the best one for sure. But being such a fan of the genre myself, it's really hard to just mention one, because there were so many games that came out on the arcade that never got home ports. And it's something that I always hated about these companies, that they never saw the foresight to put these games on the consoles. And some of them did get, some of my favourites did, very few did, but some did get releases. For example, here I have The Punisher for the Mega Drive. This was a Capcom game. This is a port of one of my favourite games on the arcades. Now, unfortunately, this port of the game is way inferior to the arcade original. The arcade original was honestly, graphically, far superior to this one. But you know what, I will say that this game is still very, very good. Unfortunately, this game is very expensive and quite rare. So most people can't really play this game unless you play it via emulation. And to be perfectly honest, given the fact that it's quite an expensive game, it's not really that good enough to warrant its purchase. So unless you're a hardcore beat 'em up fan like myself, it's very hard to recommend this game, especially since you can just emulate the arcade version for free, and that is the far superior version of that game. But looking back at all the side-scrolling beat 'em ups that I've played in the arcades, you know, I would probably have to say the one that I got the most enjoyment from has to be Aliens vs Predator by Capcom. And I guess a lot of that has to do mainly with the license. I mean, the game itself is a lot of fun for sure, but I think there are a lot of games at that time that are definitely on par with it, but I guess the license has a lot to do with it. So yeah, for me it definitely has to be Aliens vs Predator in the arcade. Just what they did with the Predator characters and what you could do was just so cool. It's a game that I love to play on emulation. And it's a game that I always used to go back to in the arcades, and I was very disappointed when I couldn't find it in the arcades anymore. And it was the one that I was probably the most sad about that never got a proper home port. Please do not confuse that game with the Super Nintendo game that was made by Activision. I know that game is a 2D side-scrolling beat 'em up, but it's not the same game as the one that Capcom did for the arcade. But yeah, that is it. So thank you very much for watching this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed my waffle of my arcade experience, and of course what my favourite games were. Please leave some comments below. Let me know what your favourite games are, what you thought of my choices. I especially would love to hear what your favourite arcade beat-em-ups were. So please let me know in the comments below. Thank you again to Danny and the 16-Bit Brothers. Very much enjoyed this video. Enjoyed watching your video, guys. Very much enjoyable. I've been watching some of other people's videos. I was watching Sega Saturn Lads video recently. So I would love to hear more responses. Please, guys, make more videos on this subject, because I would love to hear what other people's thoughts and opinions were on these side-scrolling beat 'em ups, and essentially, you know, why. I would love to hear what you guys think of this particular genre, as it's definitely probably, you know, the one that made me a game, and why I'm even talking to you guys about games today is simply because of my love for this particular genre. So that's it, guys. I'm going to leave you there. Thanks again to 16-Bit Brothers. Very much enjoyed making this video, and I will be back very soon. Bye-bye.